So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca Tamel, and I am the Program and Outreach Coordinator at the Chapman Museum. I'm so glad so many of you could join us tonight, which is going to be a really interesting talk given by Maury Thompson. Now, following Maury's talk, he is going to open it up to questions. But what he's asked us to do is that if you do have a question, please type it into the chat. And then at the end, when it is the Q&A session, I'll be moderating it. I'll read your question aloud, and then Maury will be able to answer it. So that way, we aren't worried about people accidentally speaking over each other or, you know, mics get being funky or whatever. Just type your question into the chat, and we'll make sure it gets answered at the end. All right. So, without further ado, I will give our speaker tonight an introduction. So tonight, like I said, we're going to be hearing from Maury Thompson. Maury was a reporter for the Post-Star for 25 years, but today he is a freelance writer. All right, so he specializes in the history of politics, labor organizing, media, and baseball in New York's North Country. He has written numerous books, including The Animated Feather Duster, Slow News Day Tales of the Legendary Facial Hair of Charles Evan Hughes, and The Biggest Kid at the Balloon Festival, the Walter Grishcott story, amongst others. And so now I will turn it over to Maury and his presentation, Black Baseball Players in the Adirondack region in the 19th century.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. And we'll get started. Let me first of all say that I begin with the caveat that I am neither a baseball historian nor a race relations historian. My greatest claim to baseball fame is selling 7 books of raffle tickets for the Police Athletic League baseball team at Circleville, PA in the 5th grade. I had been cut from the team at tryouts, but allowed to stay on as a bat boy. The next season, the coaches, recognizing that sales skills can be just as important as fielding and hitting skills, wanted me on the team, but I had moved on to a paper route. I do know a bit firsthand about race relations. I lived in Memphis at the time that Martin Luther King was assassinated and dusk to dawn curfews were enforced for many weeks. My expertise is in the history of politics, labor organizing, and media in New York's North Country. And with that, I write a lot about what historic newspapers reported about, and that's how I started writing about baseball. I think of my work as being a collector of stories. My son collects antique and vintage cars, and they are not in my budget, so I collect stories which can be found for little or nothing. This includes the social history which regional historic newspapers reported on. I pursue my research much in the same fashion as my longtime career as a newspaper reporter, except that instead of attending government meetings and walking down a downtown beat to find stories, I now find them in historic newspaper databases, working chronologically through various publications for several hours each day. It was in one of these searches that a headline, "The Darkies Played Nobly," caught my attention. And I read about the Cuban Giants baseball team playing at Granville in 1890. That prompted me to do further research for a post at New York Almanac, which was the genesis for this lecture. The whimsical side of my nature would like to think that North Country society was enlightened on diversity issues at the time. But the realistic side of my nature recognizes that it was more about economics. It's kind of like the Blake poems about the songs of innocence and the songs of experience. Both sides can be correct, but from a different viewpoint. In some instances, major league caliber players who were banned from the big leagues. Wait just a second. That's the weekly fire siren test going off. And I wait for that to quiet down. In some instances, Major league caliber players who were banned from the big leagues because of their race were welcome to play locally at considerably lower wages because the talent level drew in fans to keep struggling local baseball franchises afloat. In other instances, poor black athletes who worked at Adirondack hotels had a dual role as service providers and sports entertainers to wealthy whites who vacationed there. Fans admired the Cuban Giants baseball team for its athletic skills, and Granville baseball promoters admired the black baseball team for its draw at the gate. The Granville Sentinel reported on July 4th, 1890. About 1,000 people, quote unquote, including many ladies, with groups of baseball enthusiasts traveling from Rutland, Whitehall, Glens Falls, and Troy, attended the June 26, 1890 game when the Cuban Giants defeated the Granville 7-0. The multitude came to witness a good game of ball, and that ambition was satisfied, the Granville Sentinel reported on July 4th, 1890. Yet racism prevailed in the headline, which proclaimed, "The darkies played nobly." The paper described Gifford, pitcher for the Cuban Giants, as, quote unquote, the colored boy. Racism was again interjected into the news coverage in 1892 when the Cuban Giants returned to the region for a week-long road trip, including 2 games against the Champlains, a black baseball team comprised of employees of the Hotel Champlain at Bluff Point near Plattsburgh. As we go to press, the earth jars with a mighty conflict at Rouse's Point between them, the Cuban Giants, and the Hotel Champlains, who are thought to be a full match for them in skill as well as color and coaching wit, the Plattsburgh Republican reported on August 20th, 1892. The latest news from the field is that perspiration flows freely and the air is so black with minstrel jokes that the roosters are crowing. The hometown teams that played the Cuban Giants were often underdogs. Still, fans turned out in droves because of the color of baseball the black team brought to the area. The Granville Athletic Club, which owned the Granville Baseball Diamond and the Granvilles, a local semi-professional baseball team established a year earlier, was happy in 1890 with the gate receipts. After all, the local team had not been expected to win. They have the satisfaction of knowing that an immense number of people paid to see it done, and money is what the Athletic Association was principally after, the Sentinel reported. So instead of winning is everything, gate receipts are everything. It seemed an anecdote to the financial struggles of the fledgling local baseball franchise. Granville has the baseball fever in the worst way, the Granville Sentinel reported on August 9th, 1889. A startup semi-professional baseball team had a perfect record for the season so far, and Granville businessmen decided the village needed a new ball field of a caliber that fit the team's record. A local investment group met August 12th at the office of lawyer F.W. Betts to organize the Granville Athletic Club, which would lease 4 acres of land from Abram Temple at the head of Elm Street to develop a ball diamond with grandstand seating for 500 people, surrounded by a 9-foot fence. The group raised $1,000, the equivalent of about $29,500 in 2021 dollars in capital. Betts was the group's president. G.N. Finch, owner of the Central House Hotel, was vice president. Charles Schiff, secretary, and W.D. Temple, cashier of Farmers National Bank, treasurer. The group hired W.H. Hollister, a veteran baseball player, as manager. Hollister had played first base for the Troy Haymakers in 1870. The Haymakers was one of the first 12 professional baseball teams in the United States in 1869 and a charter team in the National Association of Professional Baseball Players in 1871. His cool head and good judgment is a sufficient guarantee that the Granvilles will not meet with any disastrous results on account of poor management. Work progressed quickly, and the opening semi-professional game was scheduled for August 26, between the Granvilles and the Acorns of Cambridge. A couple of amateur games had been held at the field when the grandstand and fence were under construction. The grounds are now in fine condition. The new fence is rapidly approaching completion, the Sentinel reported on August 23rd. It will be, without exception, the finest grounds in the country. A tall fence, which prevented people from watching games from outside the park without paying admission, was essential to the financial solvency of a ball club. In nearby Glens Falls, for example, baseball promoters learned quickly that a fence functioned as more than just a home run marker. The Glens Falls management attempted, unsuccessfully, to outfox a group of fans that had constructed a grandstand just outside the 2nd Street ballpark in order to watch games without paying admission, the Morning Star of Glens Falls reported on July 1st, 1886. The Deadheads occupied their grandstand yesterday in a lot adjoining the baseball ground. The management of the Glens Falls team tried to obstruct the tactics and the impecunious, meaning having little or no money, crowd by erecting 2 long poles from which a sheet was suspended. The wind blew down the poles, however, and thwarted the plans of the obstructionists. There was excitement in Granville on the day of the first semi-professional game at the new field. Players lined up at 1:30 p.m. along with the elite band of Pollitt, Vermont, at the Central House Hotel and marched to the field. The band stayed on to, quote-unquote, liven up the occasion, which turned out to be sorely needed as the Granvilles endured their first defeat of the season, committing 14 errors as they lost to Cambridge 12-1. Manager Hollister, busy answering questions and selling soda, didn't get to watch much of the 2-hour and 10-minute game. A poor exhibition of baseball would be hard to find. It was tedious to witness the many and unnecessary errors made by our home team, the Sentinel chided on August 30th. One thing is certain, and that is that it requires ball players to play the game, and the home team certainly has more than the usual number of very poor ones. Still, the game was a success at the box office, bringing in, quote-unquote, quite a credible showing for the first game of $154.30 in revenue, the equivalent of $4,556 in 2021 dollars. The attendance of the ladies was very fair, the Sentinel reported. Their appearance on the grounds had a tendency to make the game progress with gentlemanly decorum. The next home game, scheduled for August 31st, was expected to be, quote-unquote, a soft soap win for the Granvilles, until rumors, which turned out to be fact, started circulating that Whitehall was bringing in a few ringers for the game. Granville, in turn, got on their hustler and lined up a few one-day-only ringers of their own. Luckily, Granville had sized up the canalers and knew what kind of material they intended to work with, the Sentinel reported on September 6th. It is evident from the names that neither club spared pains or money to capture the game at all hazards. The curiosity and celebrity talent boosted attendance to more than 800 people that watched Whitehall defeat Granville 4-3. Granville scored 3 runs in the first inning of the 1-hour and 55-minute game and led until the 8th inning when Whitehall tied the game, going on to score in the 9th inning for the win. After that game, Granville pulled out of its slump and returned to winning, but gate receipts seldom met expectations. In 1891, the franchise was disbanded and the ballpark repurposed as a tennis facility. Prior to the June 29th game, the Cuban Giants had already played several times in Washington County in the 1890 season against the Greenwich Mutuals, winning twice and losing once. The Cuban Giants, since their first visit in the town, had spent a good deal of their idle time here and seemed to like the place very well, the Greenwich correspondent reported in the Sentinel. Later in the summer, the Cuban Giants defeated Whitehall 7-6 on July 29th, playing for a crowd that included many out-of-town visitors. It is fairly certain It is certain that this was the same Cuban Giants that was the first salaried black baseball team. Originally, players, as in the case of other black baseball teams, were paid based on a percentage of gate receipts. The team's owner switched to a salary system when gate receipts reached the point where it was less costly for him than to pay a percentage. One of the team's early names was the Black Panthers, according to oral history. The owner changed the name to the Cuban Giants, even though few, if any, of the players were from Cuba, because he felt fans might be more accepting of Cuban players than blacks. Players would often talk gibberish to each other during the game, attempting to fool fans into thinking they were talking Spanish. It was a good baseball show, combining athletic feats with circus-like stunts, similar to the contemporary style of the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team. There was inconsistent reporting about the Cuban Giants that initially left me questioning for certain if this was the original Cuban Giants of black baseball fame. The Granville Sentinel identified the team as the Cuban Giants of Newark, New Jersey. There was a team in New York, in Newark, called the Little Giants that played off and on from the 1886 to 1890 seasons, and at times had black players, according to blackpast.org, a black history website. However, the Little Giants played in professional leagues and would not be as likely to barnstorm from town to town playing independent teams. It is possible that the Sentinel confused Newark with Trenton. The original Cuban Giants, established in 1885 at the Argyle Hotel at Babylon, New York, in Suffolk County, were sold in 1886 to Walter Cook, who moved the team to Trenton, New Jersey, according to multiple sources. In 1890, the team was moved to York, PA, the name changed to the Colored Monarchs of York. On August 11, 1892, the Whitehall Times reported that the Cuban Giants of New York City, scheduled to play at Whitehall, was the same team that played in the area in 1890. The Cuban Giants are the champion colored team of the country, the Times reported. It will be remembered that when the Cuban Giants were here 2 years ago, a most exciting game was played. In 1892, the Cuban Giants played a week-long series of games in the Champlain Valley at Whitehall, Rutland, and Burlington. The game was an excellent one for the spectator, abounding in brilliant plays. 4 home runs were made, and great excitement prevailed from start to finish, the Elizabethtown Post reported on August 25th, 1892. August 20th, defeated Champlain's 5-3, with about 700 people attending the game. On September 25th, the Champlains, which I will speak about in more detail later, traveled to New York City and lost to the Cuban Giants 18-1, the Elizabethtown Post reported on September 28th, 1892. A local connection with the original Cuban Giants offers further evidence that it was indeed the team that played in the region and could explain how they came to play in the area. Frank P. Thompson, the waiter who founded the Cuban Giants at Babylon in 1885, was head waiter at the Hotel Champlain near Plattsburgh when their hotel opened in 1890, where he also founded a baseball team comprised of black employees. Several of the members of the Cuban Giants would later play for the Hotel Champlains. As with the Cuban Giants, before the Giants turned professional, the purpose of establishing the Hotel Champlain team was to provide entertainment for hotel guests. Thompson also established a team at a hotel in Florida where he worked winters. Hotel Champlain employees fielded teams for a number of summers after 1890, playing at both the hotel and in road games throughout the region. The Fort William Henry Hotel at Lake George and the Sagamore Bolton Landing also had baseball teams comprised of black employees in the late 19th century. The Morning Star of Glens Falls reported on an instance on August 21st, 1886, when guests at the Fort William Henry Hotel collected $50 to put up as prize money for the winner of the baseball game between the hotel's bellhops and waiters. A good-sized audience gathered to watch the hotel's waiters defeat the bellboys 13-9 in a game of baseball. The Bellboys, though losing, put on quite a show, the Morning Star of Glens Falls reported. Considerable mirth was exhibited at the peculiar antics of the dusty leather handlers. Today, professional baseball is a means to wealth and prestige. In the 19th century, being skilled at baseball was a means to land a summer job for a black athlete. A black journalist in 1883 explained it this way: to a large number of our people, the summertime is the harvest time. When others spin, they reap. When others madly pursue and echo over the mountainside, they calmly pursue the mighty dollar. And I'll read that quote again because I think it's pretty interesting. To a large number of our people, the summertime is the harvest time. When others spin, they reap. When others madly pursue and echo over the mountainside, they calmly pursue the mighty dollar. Perhaps the success of the Cuban Giants in drawing fans in 1990 influenced an attempt by another Washington County community to recruit a black baseball team. There was no baseball nine in this place, and there is a great possibility the Gorhams, the New York Color Club, will locate here, the Cambridge correspondent to the Sentinel reported on July 4th, 1890. There was no further mention of the recruiting attempt in subsequent 1890 issues, but the Gorhams were scheduled to play a game in Washington County in the 1891 season against the UVMs of Burlington at Whitehall, the Sentinel reported on August 14th. Baseball historian Tony Kissel writes on his blog that UVM won the game 3-2 and the Glens Falls defeated the Gorhams on August 21st. There was a local black baseball team for at least one season previously. The Saratoga Giants, a colored team from Saratoga Springs, played the Fort Edward Stars at Fort Edward on September 10th, 1888. It was expected to be an easy victory for the Giants, but the Stars pulled out a 9-3 victory in the 1 hour and 55-minute game. Great expectations were placed on the prowess of the Giants by our Saratoga neighbors. In fact, they were confident that they could clean out the Stars, horse, foot, and dragoons without half trying, the Washington County Advertiser reported. As the shades of evening came down, a demoralized and dejected ball club sadly wandered their way homeward. They came up as giants, but went down as pygmies. We see again the racist tone in the reporting. The Giants demanded a rematch, and a second game was scheduled at Fort Edward on September 17th. Washington County also had a series of integrated baseball teams in this era. James E. Brunson III wrote in his 2019 book, Black Baseball, 1858 to 1900, that John E. Gifford of Washington County played for the Cambridge Acorns in 1889, the Granvilles in 1890, the Granville Salems in 1891, all primarily white teams, and for the Cuban Giants of Hoboken, New Jersey in 1892. The People's Journal of Greenwich reported that Gifford, quote unquote, the colored third baseman for the Acorns, had 2 heavy hits when the Acorns defeated the Fosters 9-0. William Clarence Matthews, known as the ball player who nearly broke the color line, played for a season for the Hotel Champlain during his college years. Matthews, born in Alabama, was a football and baseball standout for 4 years at Harvard University. The Harvard baseball team had a tradition of taking an annual road trip to southern states. For 3 seasons, the team left Matthews behind at Harvard as coaches were concerned that southern opponents would boycott games with a black player. In Matthews' senior season, Harvard canceled the southern road trip and instead played a road trip against colleges in Pennsylvania and New York. When Matthews graduated Harvard in 1905, at age 28, there was widespread speculation that he was on the brink of a major league contract. A sports commentator for The Traveler, a Boston newspaper, advised Matthews not to take that route. I quote, "As a clean, right-living young man who has an ambition to succeed in life, it seems a pity that he would play baseball for a living. Because his skin is black, he can never play on any but itinerant colored nines that at the best eke out a hand-to-mouth existence. With all its insurmountable handicaps, baseball is not the place for Matthews. He should begin his battle for life somewhere else. Matthews did play professionally for one season for the Burlingtons of Vermont in the Northern League, an independent league that did not prohibit black players. He then opted for a career in teaching and law and was among those who broke the color line in politics. Matthews worked on Calvin Coolidge's presidential campaign, and Coolidge later appointed Matthew a regional assistant U.S. Attorney General. My research on this topic is not ended. I'm still searching for information about F.H. Griffin, head waiter at the Sagamore, who for at least 11 summers set up teams at the Sagamore with teams names such as the Bostons, the Washingtons, and the New Yorkers. And there must be more information out there somewhere about John Carsaw of Fort Henry, who, according to Svensson, was believed to be the first Black American to play baseball in the Adirondacks. Svensson wrote that he had a reputation as, quote unquote, a good catcher, a strong thrower, and a heavy hitter, and was the first catcher in the area to wear a chest protector. And with that, I'll take your questions.
All right, so we already have one question. This comes from Phil. Phil says, you mentioned that teams often brought in ringers. Did you uncover any big name ringers that played in the region?
And Phil, I know, is a baseball expert, and good to have you here tonight, Phil. I did not. I did. There was one ringer, and I'm trying to remember the year and who it was. There was a major league player. There was a major league player that got booted from the major league because of some bad conduct, and he played for like 3 or 4 weeks on a team from Vermont that played in Glens Falls against the Hudsons in, I want to say, let's see, sometime in the 1890s. The Hudsons, I believe, played for 3 years on the second street field before they went belly up because they couldn't get a wall around the field to keep people from watching. But he played for about 3 weeks, including a game in Glens Falls, and then he got called back to the majors because they realized they needed his talent more than his good behavior.
Very good. So just a reminder, if you do have a question, feel free to add it in the chat and I will read it aloud. Andrea's question got answered, so that was good. She was asking what was the Glens Falls team name, and you provided that. Takes a little bit of time for people
Yeah,
to...
there were several teams in Glens Falls in the late 19th, early 20th century. There were the Hudsons, obviously, and then oh, now my mind's blanking me. I should have like my stack of notes next to me. There was a team before the Hudsons. There was a team named after the owner of the American House Hotel. I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head. The American House Hotel was at the corner of Glen and South Streets. It's the building that now has like a bar and a cigar shop in it, the brick building. And in the old days, and my understanding is it's still there. There was an entrance in the basement from the hotel to the Empire Theater building, and when the actresses and actors would stay at the hotel, they would, instead of going outside, they would go through this basement entrance that's still there. And I'm trying to remember his name, and it's slipping my mind, the hotel owner, but he also was involved with the Hudsons. And there's a great story that Addison B. Colvin told about the hotel owner would sit on the balcony there, and when the team was on the road, and wait for them to come back into town. And if they lost, when they got back to town, he would sick his dog on the players.
Jeez. Ooh. All right. Glory asks, when these teams traveled, where did they stay?
they they stayed mostly at local hotels. Oftentimes the local hotel owners were also a sponsor of the team. Uh, but they stayed at local hotels. Um, the When the Hudsons played, the 3 seasons that the Hudsons played, when they would play against Essex County teams, if it was a one day game against Ticonderoga, they would go to Lake George and take the steamboat up and back, and their fans would travel with them. If they were going on a multi-day trip, they would take the train and go to Ticonderoga, Port Henry, and other points in Essex County and come back. And there's stories about that the fans, when they were coming back, the fans would greet them at the Fort Edward station, and they'd all ride back in a wagon, a horse-drawn wagon together.
Very nice. Nikki asked, are there any baseball fields still in existence from from the 1800s or the early 1900s?
None that I know of. That's it's possible, but none that I am aware of. Um, probably the longest standing might be the Putnam Field, which was built in I want to say the 1930s, partially with funds from the Works Progress Administration, and that's used as a softball field today. Glens Falls had several fields. They had the Hudson's Field, which was there for, I believe, 3 seasons and then dismantled. And then the next field was on Warren Street, over near in the vicinity of where Glens Falls High Cement was. Or, well, the building's still there. And the first season when they played Whitehall, they had an incentive not to go into extra innings because they had made arrangements for the train to stop at the field and pick up the Whitehall players on their way back south. And if they played too many innings, they would miss the train. And there was a field, the YMCA had a field on, I want to say Bay Street, but it might not have been Bay Street. I'd have to look back at my notes for 1 or 2 seasons. In towns around New York at the time had this love, this passion for baseball. And it was almost like I don't want to say an addiction, because baseball can't be, well, I guess baseball's a positive addiction. But they would start a team, the team would go belly up, and they would get frustrated and stop the team. And then they would build another field and start a team. And they went through this kind of a codependent relationship with baseball. They seem to be never able to make it work, but they had to keep trying. And in the 19th century, in the restaurants in Glens Falls, people were like today enamored with the major leagues. But they would they they would have chalkboards in the restaurants and bars where they would put up the daily scores from the major league teams. But in that area, you couldn't listen to a baseball game on the radio. You couldn't watch it on TV. You couldn't get the live stream. So you the only way you could get the baseball experience was to watch the local teams. And I think probably the downfall of local baseball started with radio. There's one great story about up at Saranac Lake. They were trying to tune the game in on television out of Burlington, the Red Sox game out of Burlington. And this is in the early radio era. And they couldn't get a good signal. So they went over to the Watertown television station and tuned that one in. And they got a picture, but not a signal. And so they turned the radio on to listen to the radio while they were watching the TV. And after a couple innings, they realized that they were watching the Yankees game and listening to the Red Sox game.
All right. All right. We also have another question from Phil. Have you done any research of a black team in the region that played in the 1920s called Chappie Johnson's All-Stars?
Yes, based out of Schenectady. Um, I have a few notes on them, and it's on my round to it list for research, which I probably won't get to until after the special congressional election coming up, because I still have to eat, so I still write about contemporary politics to keep food on the table. But yes, I am aware of that team. In the early 20th century, there were several teams that regularly played in the area, both in Glens Falls and in Hudson Falls. The wallpaper factory in Hudson Falls had a company team that played regularly against some black teams, but I haven't gotten too far into that segment. That's mostly around the 1920s, when those teams were playing.
Okay. Glory asks, how much did the black baseball players get paid in comparison to the white baseball players?
I don't know exact dollars, but I know that in comparison to the major leagues, it was less. But in comparison to white semi-professional teams that they commonly played against, it was more. We do know that that they started out, like most players, getting a percentage of gate receipts, and they were drawing so many fans that the owner switched it over to a salary. So I don't know exact dollar amounts. It was more than what a white semi-professional player would have made, but significantly, greatly less than what the major league players would have made.
Very interesting. All right.
And it's very similar. Very similar to the story of black baseball players is the story of black circus performers. And I did some research, and someday I hope to get a chance to write about it. Uh, the the Black Siamese twins that traveled with a circus that performed in Fort Edward, and they weren't really twins; they were sisters who were made up to look like Siamese twins. And uh, they, when they came through Fort Edward, they stayed at the classy hotel in Fort Edward where the management stayed, whereas the circus performers stayed at the lower class hotel. But the interesting thing about these two sisters, and again, I don't have my notes in front of me, but the interesting thing about these two sisters is when the Emancipation was signed, one of their former slave owners who had taken them on the road found them and signed on as their manager. And so even after the Emancipation Proclamation, this former slave owner was still making a generous bit of money off of their efforts. But they did make fairly good money for circus performers for the time, and they gave a lot of their money. They died basically penniless because they had given so much of their money away to other blacks who were poor at the time.
Oh, and Phil doesn't have a question, but he does have a comment, and he says, "I so appreciate the job Maury does researching and reporting on local history, including baseball. Thanks so much, Maury."
Thanks, Phil.
All right. Any other questions? We'll wait just a few minutes, a few seconds, I should say. See if we get any more. All right. Well, Maury, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Hope to have you back in the future. Maybe when volume 2 of your research comes out. Oh, Nikki just said. Sorry, we got one more question. Nikki asked, did any of the players stay in the area?
Um, you mean long term in the area or short term?
Um, I'm not sure. I'm
Okay,
guessing short term. Oh, she says yes, long term.
long term. Um, the Frank Thompson of the Hotel Champlain stayed in the area long term. Um, I'm not certain how long term the players in Washington County that played on the Acorns and other teams. I believe he lived in the area long term, but I'm not positive. Um, and I'm not sure how many players from the team in in the team in uh Saratoga. Some of them may have. That's one of the other things I have to do more research on. Certainly in Port Henry and Mineville, uh, getting closer into the 20th century, there were a lot of blacks who worked in the mines and a lot of the iron ore mines there, and a lot actually from all over the earth. Uh, if you go up to the Mariah Mining Museum, they have a sign that says danger, that had been salvaged from the mines. It says danger, high voltage in 7 different languages.
Wow. And Bess doesn't have a question, but she says, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, oh, and Nikki says, wow, thank you so much. So that you answered their question.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we will end tonight's talk. Again, thank you so much for everyone for coming tonight. Hope you learned something. Hope you found it interesting. And as always, make sure you're checking out the Chapman Museum's website and looking for those programs that we'll have next month and in the coming year. So we're getting lots of thank yous, Maury. We really appreciate it. We hope you have a great night, and we hope to have you back soon.
Okay.
All right. Good night, everyone. Have a good one.